welcome to World Insight, coming to you live from Beijing on CCTV News. I'm your host, Tian Wei. Coming up on today's program, growing fears of a nuclear crisis in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. After another missile launch on Saturday, experts say a fifth nuclear test is imminent. What's the DPRK's endgame? And cross-strait relations, members of Taiwan-based telecom fraud rings from Kenya and Malaysia to the Chinese mainland have rankled the Taipei officials soon after the installment of a pro-independence government. We begin today's program with the DPRK's latest nuclear test. The DPRK's official KCNA news agency reported the country's successful launch of a ballistic missile from a submarine. The test was guided by top DPRK leader Kim Yo-eun. And state media has said that the test met all technical thresholds necessary to carry out an underwater attack operation targeting South Korea and the United States. This marked the second time since last May that Pyongyang announced its successful testing. Later, we'll be discussing the significance of the test, but first, take a look at this.
Rising tensions. The DPRK has confirmed it fired a ballistic missile from a submarine off its northeast coast last Saturday, calling it a great success which gave the country another means to launch a powerful nuclear attack. The United Nations Security Council has strongly condemned the DPRK's latest test, saying it was a serious violation of relevant UN resolutions. The DPRK says it is ready to halt its nuclear weapons tests if the U.S. suspends its annual military drills with South Korea.
So we made a very logical proposal we consider to the U.S. government. Stop the war exercises in the Korean Peninsula, then we would also cease our nuclear tests as well.
Pyongyang also warned it will not be cowed by sanctions and said any attempt to pressure or punish it will only increase its resolve to resist. The South Korean government says the DPRK's ballistic missile launch was an explicit provocation and urged Pyongyang to stop.
Our government again strongly urges the DPRK to stop making absurd claims that associates annual defensive South Korea-US joint military drills with nuclear tests banned by UN Security Council resolutions, and to stop all additional provocative actions, including nuclear tests.
U.S. President Barack Obama has also dismissed North Korea's proposal to suspend nuclear tests if the U.S. ends its annual military exercises with the South. Last Saturday's launch was one of many missile tests the country has conducted since its latest nuclear test in January. On February 7th, it launched a long-range rocket, which was condemned as a disguised test of ballistic missile technology. And in early March, Pyongyang fired short-range and medium-range missiles and artillery shells. Analysts believe that the North may be gearing up for a fifth nuclear test as a show of strength ahead of the North Korea Workers' Party Congress.
And for more on the DPRK missile launch, we are now joined in our Beijing studio by two guests. Professor Ki-Yong Chang, who is editor-in-chief of the Force Media and now a visiting professor at Kim Il-sung University in North Korea. Welcome to our program. Also in our Beijing studio, we're having Dr. Teng Jianchun, who is the director of the Center for Arms Control at the China Institute of International Studies. Welcome as well. And meanwhile, joining us from Washington, D.C., we have Mr. Yung Jung Lim, who is a lecturer of Korea Studies at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Meanwhile, joining us from Boston, we also have Mr. Jim Walsh, who is with the Security Studies program at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. It is a big and strong panel we're having today. Certainly, we want to invite opinions from all relevant parties. First of all, Professor Chang, since you came back from DPRK not long ago, what do you make of the U.S. offer? As President Obama said during the weekend, here I quote, "If the DPRK shows seriousness in denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula, we will be willing to engage in serious consulting with the DPRK over the Korean tensions." What do you make of this? And how do the North Koreans make of this?
I don't think they will buy that. because it's not really sincere and serious. U.S. has never dropped their nuclear weapons upon the head of the DPRK since November 1950. Ever since, U.S. has kept that nuclear weapons on the other side of the head, and while asking the DPRK drop the gun, I don't think that will make sense to anybody.
All right. Mr. Wash, coming from the U.S., what do you make of Professor Chang's statement? How serious do you think President Obama is at the end almost of his term dealing with the Korean crisis?
Well, I think President Obama is sincere, but I'm guessing he's also skeptical that North Korea will want to enter into negotiations. The U.S. says it's been willing to enter negotiations. Again, there's been this question of whether there are preconditions or not. I think in the end, I mean, he did sign an agreement with Iran. I think he is open to dealing with North Korea, but I don't think anyone thinks this is going to go anywhere, so I don't think he's going to invest a lot of time in it. And as far as our colleague who teaches in North Korea, I would say, you know, he invokes that the U.S. has had nuclear weapons since the Korean War. That seems to me totally irrelevant. The Security Council has spoken with one voice saying North Korea should not be having a nuclear missile tests, and that UN security group includes China and all the other major powers. So this just isn't about the U.S. It's behavior that the international community opposes.
We're going to hear the Chinese voice from the China side, but before we go there, let me ask you, Ms. Lim from Washington, but originally coming from South Korea. DPRK seemed to suggest if the U.S. can stop the joint military exercise with South Korea, now DPRK might want to hold its nuclear program, but do not specify as to the details of the possible plan. How do you think Seoul should react to this?
Yes, again, the joint exercise between the ROK and the United States is nothing new. It has been done since, as we all know, it has been done since 1973, even though the name has been changed from like a Team Spirit to the current key resolve, but it has been done annually, regularly by the two countries, two allies, which means I assume that they are absolutely North Korea, Pyongyang, or the Ri Su-yong as well. They all understand we cannot actually stop almost at the end of the this year's joint exercise. So it sounds like they try to actually justify their another provocation through attributing this force, to the other side, again, the U.S. and the ROK.
Dr. Tong? As indicated by these three other panelists, even though they are not representing their governments, they certainly represent the public opinions. Nobody is giving any concessions. How could the next step of any consultation or negotiation, communication possible? What about from the Chinese side?
Generally speaking, China's position is very clear that the negotiation dialogue should be the best choice for the issue. And according to the three principles, the first principle should be the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, not only includes the DPRK, but also the ROK. The whole peninsula should be included in the denuclearization. The second is peace and stability. And the third is negotiation dialogue. I think the three choices are already on the table, and the situation in DPRK in Korean Peninsula has been eased a little bit. Even DPRK did this so-called sea-based rocket test days ago, but I think the tension there has been calmed down. I think 1 month ago, a Russian diplomat said in Moscow that DPRK was willing to have a new round of negotiation with the other parts, in that region. So I think this is actually a positive signal from the United States, from DPRK, even a lot of mistrust among the countries concerned.
Interesting. You are guiding us to a very different direction. Having said that, though, what's going to happen next is extremely important. Whether this direction is possibly correct or that direction when it comes to predictions. So let me ask you, Ms. Lim, now based in Washington from South Korea, what do you make of South Korea's prediction that the DPRK might be already ready for the 5th round of nuclear test, possibly on the eve of the Party Congress, just to come very soon.
Yes, there are, of course, many different voices or observations about the possibility of the 5th nuclear test, but including myself, I think many experts will predict, or it looks like it's pretty likely that they will have another nuclear test around the Congress, the 7th Congress of their Workers' Party. So it sounds, again, it looks very likely. The reason why I predict like this is, again, they, as we discussed before, Mr. Lee Soo-young, he came to the New York City, but he also was trying to justify the coming provocation, including nuclear tests, through, again, criticizing the other side. And also other satellite images, as far as many other experts are analyzing, satellite images also prove that there are significant signals or signs of the coming actual nuclear tests. And another final point I have to make is, again, the Kim Jong-un's policy has been the dual policy, or Pyeongjin line. He wanted to try develop both together, economy and the nuclear program. So for his own domestic public support as well, I think he will try, definitely he will try to conduct another nuclear test to consolidate the legitimacy, domestic legitimacy.
That, of course, is a prediction coming from some experts, including from you, Ms. Lim. But Professor Chang, since you've been teaching in the DPRK, what is your sense? Some suggest the nuclear weapon is, or the nuclear development in DPRK is a political issue rather than military issue. However, when it comes to the statement made by the Foreign Minister Ri in New York at the United Nations, he talked about the Party Congress achieving 3 goals. Mainly, one is to advance the economy, secondly, improve people's livelihood, and thirdly, to strengthen the national defense. Of course, he's not specifically mentioned about any nuclear weapons development, but the thing is, if that is the case, nuclear weapon development is not likely to help people to advance the economy. It's not likely to help people to improve their livelihood, because DPRK is going to face more boycott and also other policies, much harder from the other countries, that's for sure. So are those goals contradictory to one another? Really developing the nuclear weapons particularly good for the DPRK, or actually bad for the DPRK for the long term, Professor?
If you look at the situation from different angles, I may disagree with your approach that what I see, the choice they has made, the road they have taken to make sure the national economic, domestic economic development, at the same time, make sure they do not lose their independence, self-determination. I believe they have made it possible by the waging to the parallel policy, economic development and nuclear weapons development as a nuclear deterrent power. For sure, the US has not been able to make any military attempt to override North Korea ever since 1953.
All right, but what about the security of the other countries? If DPRK develops a nuclear weapons of its own, the other countries feel threatened, and therefore what about the independence and security of other peoples?
The 4 major powers, including China and Russia and the United States, what rights they say they can keep their weapons to wield the power? Why do not let the small guy have their own weapons to deter U.S. aggression? Right. Everybody knows it's the U.S. the aggressor, not the small guy, the North Korea.
Okay, we heard from the arguments from your side. Let me come to you, Dr. Chen. We're having a very fair debate. Everybody has their chance of saying what they believe. So let me come back to you. China used to be the allies of DPRK, but at this moment, China already joined the United States, South Korea, and Russia, many others at the UN Security Council on the sanctions against DPRK, especially the latest round, much more severe than it used to be. So where is China? What if there is a 5th round of nuclear test? What would that mean for China and all the others' reactions?
First, I should say the fifth nuclear test by DPRK is on the agenda because the fourth nuclear test by DPRK actually is a theoretical preparation for the so-called hydrogen bomb test. And if you're going to have a real hydrogen bomb test, I'm sure the DPRK will go even further to carry out the fifth nuclear test. This is only a technical analysis. In terms of the logic, for DPRK to possess or to develop nuclear bomb, I think this is actually a very cunning question. From the international perspective, everyone knows that there is NPT treaty, from late or early 1970s.
But the DPRK withdrew from it.
Yeah, in 2003. And according to the treaty, even you are not a state member of the treaty, you should abide by the international law, which every country, the non-nuclear weapon states should not go to be nuclear armed. But DPRK, go a very strange way. I think this is actually a strategic mistake made by not Kim Jong-un, but Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-il. This is actually runway for DPRK to go. Of course, the security consideration is very important. It should be the number job for the decision makers. But what is the significance to possess nuclear bomb today? It's useless to some extent. No one can dare to use the nuclear bomb against each other.
But this time it is very interesting, Dr. Tang. We see some already change of directions of communications. You see this time the ambassador from the DPRK at the UN already directly point to the United States and say, if you guys stop, we're going to stop. And also President Obama already directly, in a way, responded to that statement, saying, well, if you guys stop, we're going to stop. So it seems that the conversation is not like what it used to be, that everybody speaks their mind, but now more directly between Washington and Pyongyang. What do you make of that?
Actually, we have heard a lot, about who will stop first, from the United States or
but
DPRK.
this time the direction is more interesting.
So while we are facing the tension in DPRK, in Korean Peninsula, I don't think the two sides will be, give any compromise, especially from the United States. Why, the sanction actually this time very effective in, against the development of nuclear capability in DPRK. So even ROK are very interested in the continuation to have further sanction against North Korea.
All right.
This is the situation we are facing now.
Okay, Professor Chang, I will let you briefly respond before we go to other guests.
Let me just clarify. Sorry for the young lady from South Korea. ROK doesn't have any independence from United States whatsoever. So we don't even have to talk about the South Korean position here. We are talking about the U.S. aggression for 70 years has never stopped and still conducting nuclear war games every year, all around the year. Why the big powers do not stop them from conducting the military drills?
I will let Ms. Lim to respond with one sentence or two before we go to other guests. Otherwise, it's not fair. Ms. Lim.
Again, the United States are okay. This is an alliance ship. Alliance means, again, we have to collaborate together for the security.
Okay, Professor Chang, let me ask you, because we don't want to escape the question about the DPRK's nuclear issue before we could accuse others of an alliance ship. So what about that specific fifth round of nuclear tests? Do you see it is coming? What if it is coming and others respond in an even harsher way? What does that mean for DPRK?
I don't think the DPRK will heed to any pressure from outside. I believe they will continue their way. They believe it's their own survival, independently, not rely on any powers around them.
I see your argument already there. And also, let me go to you, Mr. Walsh. You've been attentively listening to the other panelists. Mr. Walsh, if I could hear your voice, I hope so. Help us to understand. Help us to understand now. What if there's a fifth round? And it seems that the international community has done what is done. And it seems that the Obama administration, from the very beginning, strategic patience, so-called, toward DPRK has not worked. And Well, Washington was very busy developing ties with Iran, with Cuba. Nothing has been done so far about the DPRK nuclear issue. It is already, the clock is ticking, I have to say, for Mr. Obama to come out from his post for now.
Well, you know, I wish there was negotiations. I've always been in favor of negotiations. But it takes, as they say in the U.S., it takes two to tango. It takes two to dance. And I think the U.S. position was that North Korea has staged a series of missile and nuclear tests and has not shown a lot of interest in negotiating. But we'll see. But I think, to your question, unfortunately, and again, I've been a critic of strategic patience. I don't like the policy. But I think the reality is we're going to have a nuclear test because of the May Party Congress. Then everyone's going to be forced to come out and condemn it. And then they will expand sanctions. There's even talk of going after remittances. But, you know, we just passed a big UN sanctions bill just less than a month ago. My guess is there'll be another one. And we're going to get in this cycle of action and reaction that's going to make negotiation very difficult.
Well, Mr. Kim, Mr. Walsh was suggesting that there's unlikely to be much response now coming from Washington, even there's a possibility of the fifth round. Dr. Tang, this put China into a much difficult situation because the Party Congress is coming in DPRK, and also because China is on the border. Many of the DPRK nuclear facilities are not far away at all from Chinese border. What if there's an accident? What if there is a mistake, if not other possibilities? But on the other hand, nobody is willing to move. So what can China do? Is China being put into this trap?
It's really a dilemma for the Chinese government, but I think the recent leaders of China gave very clear-cut position toward the DPRK nuclear issue and also the denuclearization in Korean Peninsula. For example, the recent statement by the Foreign Minister of China, Wang Yi, he mentioned that the security interests of China should be safeguarded and in a very efficient way. So for the first time, I heard the statement from such a senior official in the Chinese government saying that the Chinese security interests should be safeguarded, which means China will be well prepared for any accidental incident in DPRK. Especially, you mentioned the nuclear facilities very close to the Chinese border, and also the DPRK nuclear test did some harm in the northeast part of China. Some school shivered during the nuclear test, and the local people complained a lot about the nuclear test by DPRK. So China, on one side, will continue its effort in the diplomatic, and will push forward the dialogue and the negotiation with all the parties concerned. We'll continue the discussion with the United States, with Russia, and even with DPRK. This is one side of the coin. Another side is the military preparation. I'm sure all the military preparation in the northeastern part of China have already been there. And of course, China will give very efficient preparation for any accidental incident in DPRK.
Mr. Walsh, before we go, final question for you. Has the U.S. policy toward DPRK totally failed so far? Can we reach that conclusion now? Secondly, what can be the actions coming from the United States, particularly now, given the latest crisis and possible crisis to come?
Well, on your first question, I can't name any country whose North Korea policy has been a success. It's the purpose of the international community, a shared objective for the DPRK to give up its nuclear program. That hasn't happened. There is no policy on the part of anyone that has been successful with North Korea so far. I think, again, in the near term, I wish I could be optimistic. I just don't see it, because they're going to have this test for internal purposes, and then we're going to have to respond to it, and it'll be difficult to have a negotiation right after, on the heels of sanctions and a test. And so we'll have to wait for a while to try again, but by then we may have a new president in the U.S.
Well, that's for sure. Well, we are debating this issue. I understand over the months and even the past few years, there has always been some kinds of discussions at different levels taking place among countries concerned, even including the DPRK and the United States. We hope those efforts will continue because eventually we have to see the end of the tunnel, some light at least. Thank you so much, Professor Kim Yong-chang, Dr. Teng Jianquan, Ms. Yu Zhang Lim, and Mr. Jim Walsh. Really appreciate all your perspective. Thank you so much. Stay with us here on World Insight. We got our final segment coming right up. Cross-Strait tensions, the extradition of Taiwan-based telecom fraud rings from Kenya and Malaysia to the Chinese mainland has raised questions of how Taiwan's pro-independence government will respond. Welcome back. You're watching World Insight on CCTV News. And now let's turn to the latest in the telephone fraud case that has caused the friction between the Chinese mainland and Taiwan. China is battling an explosion of telecom fraud that has cost billions of dollars in financial losses and driven some victims to suicide even. Official data shows the boiler rooms run by scammers from Taiwan are responsible for more than 50% of telecom fraud on the Chinese mainland. Before our discussion, let's take a look at this backgrounder.
A belated confession. 27-year-old Liu Taiting was one of the suspects deported from Kenya to Beijing on April 13th. He confessed to police that he went to Kenya not for vacation but to conduct telecom fraud. Liu confirmed he sent more than 10,000 illicit messages per day, earning more than 240,000 Taiwan dollars, or nearly 7,500 US dollars in the process.
有基本底薪，也有提成。
基本底薪是多少？
大概3万元台币。
3万元台币。
对。
那么如果诈骗成功之后呢？
那以200万为一个基数，提2%。那300万加0.5，400万以上3%。
3%。
为止。
Earlier this month, 45 fraud suspects from Taiwan were deported by Kenya to Beijing out of the whole 27. China is battling an explosion of telecom fraud. Media says some 10 billion yuan flows to Taiwan from the mainland every year. Only some 200,000 yuan has been recovered. This has caused friction between the two sides. The differences between the two legal systems have also added fuel to the fire. On April 16th, Taiwan released 20 telecom fraud suspects deported by Malaysia, citing a lack of evidence, but later took them back into custody.
Specifically targeted people on the Chinese mainland and their victims are from the mainland. Not to mention that many of the suspects are themselves from the mainland. We will investigate, prosecute, and try this criminal game in accordance with mainland law.
Last Thursday, working groups from Taiwan and the Chinese mainland met and discussed cooperation in cracking down on telecom fraud. The Taiwan delegation's top priority is to resolve this case.
For the case that's already happened, we're hoping we can advance a joint investigation and cooperation over how work is divided up and managed. To prepare for future possible cases like this, we hope to set up a reasonable routine mechanism.
April 26th will mark the 7th anniversary of the signing of the Cross-Strait Joint Crime-Fighting and Judicial Mutual Assistance Agreement. Since that agreement was signed, achievements have been made thanks to the efforts of law enforcement departments on both sides. But problems remain. Both sides are calling for sticking to the facts and remaining calm, as ultimately the common goal is to prevent such acts of fraud from happening again.
And for more discussion about the telecom fraud, which involving China's mainland and Taiwan, we are joined here in the Beijing studio by Mr. Zhong Ho Tao, who is a researcher in the Taiwan studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome to our program.
Thank you.
And also joining us from Taipei in Taiwan, we have Joanna Lei, who's a former legislator and also head of research at the Chenghua 21st Century think tank. Welcome as well, Ms. Lei, to our program. First of all, we understand that there's already a joint cooperation possible for the investigation about this fraud case between the mainland and Taiwan. Ms. Lei, let's just be frank. What kind of challenges do you perceive in the investigation likely to take place?
Well, certainly in the first instance, there was public outcry in terms of these 45 people being extradited to mainland China. And I think that is not because Taiwanese do not consider fraud to be a heinous crime, but because most of the Taiwanese were misled by misinformation. The initial information stated that those people were acquitted by the Kenya court, and then they were sent to China simply by sovereignty considerations, which both of whom were erroneous. Later on, we found out the truth that the Kenya only tried them for misuse of telecom information, equipment, and also they were sent to China primarily because most of the victims were in mainland China. So that addresses your question. In terms of Taiwanese government rules and law enforcement officers, because the crime did not happen in Taiwan, and the victims were not in Taiwan, there were only limited assistance that Taiwan could support mainland China's investigation. On the other hand, mainland China has both the evidence and the alleged criminals as well as the victims. So in these particular cases, the 45 Taiwanese involved in the Kenya ring, I think Taiwan does have a support role. The supporting role is to support the families for visitation or to provide legal assistance to allow these people have full legal defense. Other than that, in terms of investigation or criminal prosecution, there were little Taiwanese authorities could do on the island.
I see. Let's go to you, Mr. Zhong. What do you make of this supporting role Ms. Lei from Taipei just outlined coming from the Taiwan side? Is that what the mainland police and the relevant departments of investigation would like to see?
Yes, of course. The Chinese mainland officials indeed sincerely wish the Taiwan side could provide some supporting, especially could provide some basic information of those suspects and provide some evidence of those suspects. I hope the two sides could cooperate smoothly in future. However, there are still lots of challenges. The most challenge now is I hope these cases would not be politicalized. Otherwise, the cooperation maybe would be stopped. And in future, the biggest challenge is that whether Tsai Ing-wen, after her taking her position, taking her office in May 20, whether she could accept 1992 consensus. If she refused to accept 1992 consensus, maybe the dialogue between the two sides will be stopped. Then the cooperation between those legal departments will be stopped. That will be the greatest challenge for the two sides, I think.
Right. Well, of course, this case comes at a very critical time, I have to say. Ms. Lei, at ordinary days, this is not much of a problem. But now, when the May the 20th is approaching, when the new government in Taiwan is likely to come into the office and possibly make clear as to what's their stance toward the mainland, that is really the sensitive issue here. What do you make, Ms. Lei, given your political knowledge of the island and your, shall I say, very experienced personal interactions with even Ms. Tsai Ing-wen herself, making of the fact that she has not spoken at all on this case? Is it pro? Are you pro toward this practice or against this practice? What kind of signal is sending?
Well, I do believe that Ms. Tsai Ing-wen has worked behind the scene, because if you watch carefully, in the first instance, both DPP and New Power, those two new parties which are in the pan-green camp, actually launched an all-out campaign against the Ma Ying-jeou government, saying that they should rescue those Taiwanese back into Taiwan and making it into a huge human rights issue and sovereignty issue. But later on, when the facts were gradually cleared, that is, they were charged with heinous crime of telecom fraud and there were serious evidence against them, then all the DPP legislators, as well as New Power, have changed their tone. All of a sudden, they stopped criticizing the government for not rescuing them, but started to criticize the Minister of Justice in terms of her personal stance. I think the sudden change of direction probably came from Ms. TAIWAN to tell them, hush, hush, this is not the right thing to say. However, I fully agree with your studio guest that is, TAIWAN has to make clear in terms of whether her stance on the 92 consensus is conducive to cooperation of Cross-Strait going forward, as mainland China have repeatedly asked her to make that stance clear.
Mr. Zhong, this is really, as I said, the most sensitive time that something like this comes up. Of course, people of different political consensus would take advantage of this opportunity and advance their own cause. That's no problem, and that's no doubt. But having said that, though, how much do you think the ways that the Taiwan side is handling this issue would indicate or hint to the mainland and even the rest of the world as to what kinds of likely position and attitude they're likely to take on May the 20th? And what do you make of this kind of judicial cooperation, which of course has been an agreement reached by the year 2009 by the two sides across the Taiwan Strait, could mean for the overall consensus between these two sides?
Yes, the biggest change, the biggest challenge for Taiwan side is maybe the public opinion in Chinese mainland. In the past, the Chinese mainland, the common people believe Taiwan, the most beautiful thing in Taiwan is Taiwanese, is people. But for this case, maybe in future, at least some people in Chinese mainland believe that Taiwan is nothing but the haven of fraud. If at least this kind of perception. Exactly. So maybe the image of Taiwan would be changed for Chinese mainland. And if Taiwan side could not punish those suspects properly, then its image will be changed for the entire world. And another side is that, the Taiwan side, Taiwan is enjoying visa-free program for more than 140 countries and regions. And if Taiwan could not deal with these suspects properly, then maybe those countries will stop those kind of visa program for Taiwan.
Well, you didn't answer my question directly. I see you are more talking about Taiwan's image for the future when others see Taiwan, whether from mainland or the rest of the world. But I would like to continue by repeating my question again as to how do you think the Taiwan political parties, particularly now the DPP at this moment, its way of handling this issue at the moment could indicate to the mainland about the Taiwan's possible stance when the new government comes in toward cross-strait relations?
The new government, the Tsai government, of course, is willing to continue this kind of cooperation between the two sides. And for the Chinese mainland, it will continue willing to conduct this kind of cooperation between the two sides, so for the benefits of Taiwan compatriots and also to protect the benefits of the victims in Chinese mainland.
I see. Well, let me go to you before we wrap up, Ms. Lei. There are several issues here. One is judicial issue. The other is the internal debates and public opinion issue across the Taiwan Straits on both sides toward this fraud case about each other. And thirdly, of course, there is the issue of how each other is likely to treat one another after May the 20th. This has a lot to do with what Taiwan and the new government has in mind and will announce about its cross-strait relations policy. What do you think, all of these elements combined, can we find a solution to this specific case? What do you make of the near future cross-straits?
Let me take your second question to start. Please note that most of the people in Taiwan do consider telecom fraud a very heinous crime. And that is a general consensus. And the outcry to save those people thinking they were victims were very quickly turned into outcries for DPP not to erroneously protect people who might be subject to wrongdoings. So in that sense, I fully agree that Taiwan has to deal with this issue internally, and that public outcry and the consideration has already happened.
Right.
So DPP will have to yield to the public opinion and started to revisit their position and stating that they have to deal with this. That having said, Cross-Strait joint agreement to combat crime has benefited Taiwan tremendously. It allowed us to repatriate, extradite criminals from mainland China back to Taiwan for legal prosecution. So in the future, when Taiwan take on her leadership role and take on a pragmatic view, she would realize that this is actually not only mutually beneficial, but actually benefit Taiwan more than it benefits mainland China.
Right.
So it is to her advantage and to the best interest of the people for her to preserve the goodwill and joint cooperation.
All right. Lei Chen, or Joanna Lei as known, and also Zhong Ho Tao with us. Thank you so much. Really appreciate both of your perspectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more of our program, visit our website. Just type in World Insight CCTV News into your search engine. You'll be able to find us, or you can also check out our YouTube channel. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone at the World Insight team, thanks for watching, and tune in again tomorrow for more insights from across China and around the world. Good night.